Welcome to Ready Set Exec, the podcast, where we sit down with executives across North America to unpack their business, leadership, and expertise.
And every other week, join us for Market Watch, all things hiring, real insights and no fluff. Hi, everyone. I'm here with Mark, executive advisor, founder, and board leader who has spent more than 25 years guiding CEOs through growth, succession, and legacy-defining transitions. As a founding member of the Sage Group Collective and former CEO of Design Group International, he specializes in process consulting, structured peer advisory, and helping leaders navigate pivotal decisions with clarity and confidence. A founding board member of the Society for Process Consulting and author of Listening, Helping Learning, Mark is known for his philosophy of ask, listen, rather than sell and tell, transforming isolation in the C-suite into influence and wise action. It's good to have you on today, Mark.
I'm delighted to do this with you, John.
And one of the things I think was some recent news was that you just had published your book, The Maestro Effect, right?
Yeah, I'm laughing because I still don't have a copy that I'm holding. A couple of friends have ordered copies and they've arrived, and there's a bulk order on its way to me, and I'm not at my office. So I'm hoping that as I get back, it's actually there waiting for me. But I'm told it's a real thing and it exists and that there's a ebook for it. But it's one of those things like, kind of want to see your baby, and I haven't seen my baby yet.
Yeah, I can imagine the anticipation. Just holding it, physically in your hands is definitely a nice thing for sure. So your book, just for people that don't know, and we'll share it in the episode links, of course. You're talking about future value, succession, legacy, and business. This is for people that obviously are transitioning out of working or retiring at some point and thinking, what am I going to do with my business? And you kind of lay it all out in the book, right?
Yeah, we do. And it's not just about, hey, I want to retire. So now what do I do? I want this thing that I've been leading to continue on when I'm not here. I want it to offer dignifying work for people. There's still a mission to fulfill. I want to slingshot a successor into the future. It's probably important for me to have a good life to go to, one that I've thought through instead of, floundering for the last years of my life or something. So when they begin to see that will require orchestration, hence the title, the Maestro Effect, we actually have a lot of complexity you've got to manage. It's a convoluted set of steps to do that well. Many people do not do that well. There's a lot of transition stories that are painful. A lot of value gets lost in the companies. A lot of shenanigans that happen in the boardrooms or in the C-suite as people jockey for a position because it's not been very planful or very well thought out. It's an anxious time. And so to find a way to tamp that down, to be as deliberate about this planning as you were with any strategy or with the founding of the company, is what we help to do. And we found that there are some very important elements we identify four that have to be paid attention to. It doesn't guarantee success because there's a lot of stuff you can't plan for, you can't control. All it takes is a new government regulation or something that you couldn't see, like a new entrant in the marketplace. You didn't see it coming. That's kind of out of your hands. But there are things that are. If you pay attention to these four, it really works. If you don't, I'll say it this way: when we are against those painful stories, usually one or more of those elements have not been paid attention to.
So I can imagine it's just like for some people, when you're thinking about leaving a legacy or retiring or whatever it may be, you kind of procrastinate on it. I know, for example, just writing a will. I have children and I've really procrastinated on writing a will. I know I need to do it. It's something I have to have in place and all that. But it's like, it's hard to let go, I guess is what it is. And if you're running your business, to let go of it to somebody else should be pretty terrifying, I guess, especially if you're successful, because you're like, I don't want someone else to come in and totally, watch everything we've been doing. So how do you get people to sort of, let's say, admit that, okay, it's time to pass the torch or whatever it may be? Or how do they go through that psychologically? That to me sounds really difficult, especially if you're a prideful person like me, where it's like letting, you know what I mean? It's like, you build something and I mean, I put it this way, in I don't know how old I'll be, but let's say 25 years from now, knock on wood, I'd like to pass Ready, Set, Exec on to, let's say, the next generation. And, that to me is a hard psychological step to take, you know?
It really can be. I just want to agree with you. I'd like to point out that I admire the fact that you could describe the dynamic. That means you're off to a great start. You can say, hey, I've got my pride. Hey, I've got this thing I love that I'm doing. I know it's going to be hard for you. Well, that means you're taking some of the power of the dynamic away just because you're looking at it, you're facing it, you're describing it. So it's already easier for you than it might be for some others. Maybe two things I could touch on here. You're right. We do kind of think of it as like this is like planning my funeral or writing my
Yeah.
will. I'd like to say it's more like changing out your hot water heater. Like you've got to do it. You're going to save money, but the thing's still limping along, but you're going to get the value back. It's a pain. So if we can get it out of, don't ever want to touch it because it makes me think about dying to, this will be a pain to do, but it will also be good. We're going to get benefits from it. Maybe we can engage it a little bit earlier and do it with some meaning. But the other thing we could touch on is if we start our business, like if I said, John, for you with Ready, Set, Exact, you said, what's the end in mind? So let's do that. What's the end in mind? Which means you're already, if you're going to grow your business and be successful, you're planning a bench. You're making sure that nobody is indispensable. You're getting some continuity planning done so that if you have any hit by the bus moments for you, a key employee, a departmental head, that you can modulate and step in behind each other, and that there are things that you're doing now that you won't be doing in 25 years, or you'll never hand it off, right? Because you have never let anybody else do anything. So
Yeah.
as you grow, you're handing things down to other people. So let's plot that trajectory. So if it's more a part of our business planning with end in mind and long term in mind, it's no longer about death and taxes. It's about continuity. It's about actually achieving the value you set out to achieve, which you will not arrive at if there's nobody that wants it.
Yeah.
And you can't show what the value is. So this is a part of the business growth. When we put it there, we're much better served and it's a lot easier to engage with it.
I think once you overcome the initial fear of it and the procrastination of it, then it becomes a business thing. It's just another process, right?
Yeah, of course we do this. This is what we got to do.
Not everyone has the self-awareness I do, but I mean,
Oh, hey.
for others,
We'll
they
have
will
you keep
struggle.
working on your humility there. But yeah,
Yeah.
and congratulations on being self-aware and working at it.
Yeah.
That's so important for the executive life. You have to know you if you're going to be able to help develop other people. Otherwise, you're just going to treat them as things that you got to get stuff from.
Okay, that's fair enough. And so, for those that are maybe interested in reading about this in your book, can you give us a little sneak peek on, you said 4 items that you look at?
Yeah, we see there are 4 key elements. So, like, if I really want to hand this off well so that the value is maintained or grown, and that successors have no real impediments in front of them, and I have a sense of the kind of life I want to be living because I'm already living it, and I can go deeper into it. There are 4 key elements. So, one is if I can conceive of my end coming, or I can see a moment where somebody else is going to need to lead this, or I'm going to need to, doesn't mean I've left the business or retired. It could mean I'm now going to chair the board, or I'm going to run our philanthropic arm, or there's another enterprise I'm going to go to now. I'm just going to sell my stake in this one. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons. But the minute I can begin to conceive of that, my job has changed because now it's about the successful transfer. That's the final measure of the work. So even if it's not a formally written job description, what I need to be about, what everybody's going to say about how I led is going to tie to how I manage that. So what is that job? Let's get very specific about it so I can actually perform it instead of not knowing. So that's one, job description of transition. We call it the Maestro level leader job description. Second one would be there's a future value balance sheet. So if I'm stepping out of an organization and I want my successor to succeed, I'm not just doing it for the right now, I'm doing it with the direction of our currently expressed strategy. So if we intend to be 30% larger in 3 years, that's the trajectory we're on, well, then the organization will be different. Be different roles. Need to be a different capital structure, and there's going to need to be some bolstering of the talent pool or the pipeline for talent. So it's not just the capital in dollars; it's the talent, it's the infrastructure. So what does that need to be? Have I laid the groundwork for that to be in place or for it not be in place. I'll give a quick illustration. I was working with someone a couple of weeks ago. They are an ESOP. And as they move into transition, what the incoming person is realizing is, oh, we have a pretty big nut 5 years from now, given the talent pool we've got, given who's here. We got a lot of people who are imminent with retirement, and we're going to have a big outlay, and that's money that's not available to us, or we don't have it all in place yet. So how do we make sure that the successor isn't locked down and can't grow the business because they're having to solve for things that we didn't address? So that future value balance sheet matters. A third one is there's what we call a Maestro map. So, John, there are things that you're doing that you own, you got it, you figured it out, they're part of it, and maybe you're even handing them off to others. So that's what we'd say, that those are aligned. But underneath that, there are things that you are now engaging with that haven't resolved yet. Maybe you haven't handed them off to someone. You're figuring it out still. You're prototyping something. You're doing A/B tests. You're still conceptualizing it. And then others might be engaged with you in that. And then there are things you're thinking about that the business isn't ready yet, but you're seeing it, it's coming, and it's kind of living in your imagination. So what we try to do is map what's in your head that you're imagining, what are you engaging in that's still yours, what is aligned where others can take it. Let's list them. Let's talk about their status, and now let's start to create a map that helps you go from here to there, so we can track its status, and it's now in the world, visible to others, like business partners or a board. That way, if something happens and there is a sudden John's not available, partners can pick it up and continue on. If that's not available, oh my gosh, the stuff that gets lost cannot be found, cannot be replaced. The amount of time and money that's spent trying to recover something is immense. So we really want to get that map. You can't lay it out like a Gantt chart, a project plan, but you can lay out status, what the next steps are, and then track along with others so it lives in the world. And then the fourth one is what we call your leadership philosophy. There's a way that you do things. There's a why you do them the way you do them, even if you're inconsistent. So we want to help that become articulate so that any successors knows how you navigate it, and they can determine, do they want to do it the same way? Do they want to do it different? Do they want to take parts of it and amend it, add to it? And they can do it with full knowledge instead of stumbling against things and breaking things and having people say, well, we've never done it this way. Well, why do we do it this way? We don't know, but that's what John always said. And I find this to be a critical one. Like, if this isn't there, it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
And I also find it to be one of the most fun things. We're not talking about you got to write a book. We're talking about, even if it's a half a page with 5 bullet points, it's what's guiding you. It's what you're doing. It's what you care about. And one of the ways I get to this with people is say, just set me free with your people for a day or 2 days, maybe even a couple key family members. I'm just going to ask them, what is it that John always says? What's a characteristic John phrase? And what happens is you get to about the third person, some of these things start to repeat.
Yeah.
Now I can sit down with you and say, okay, tell me about this. Why do you say that? There's a story behind it. There's a forming story that made this important to you. Let's get that figured out. Well, as soon as you work through 5, 6 or so of those, this leadership philosophy starts to emerge. Is this what you want it to be? What would you change? What would you do? And now it starts to live in such a way that you can navigate by it, but so can others, which is one of the key transitions for legacy and for the continuation of the business, because people can see it and can know it and have a certainty, as before they're just guessing. So those 4 elements, the job description, the future value balance sheet, this map from here to there, and getting the leadership philosophy expressed well enough that other people can recognize it. And so can that leader.
No, there's a lot to dig in there, and we'll definitely, we need to read the book to dig in more. So one of the things I did pick up on, though, was something you referred to as the third turn of the leader. That's what this is about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain maybe what does third turn mean? What is first, second turn? And sort of how does that whole process work?
Yeah, well, I think somewhat known for loving rubrics that are easy to create a way of talking about something that's a little bit complex. But if you think in terms of a career in 3 turns, that you're moving around this race of life or around the racetrack or whatever. That first turn, you're learning, if you're going to be a leader, you're learning to lead yourself, master your skills. What do you enjoy? Can you lead a project? Can you lead a team? Do you want to? And about 80%, it's actually about 84% of the workforce spends their entire career in turn one. That's what they do. They are frontline workers. They're very skilled at whatever it is that they do because they've done it 10,000, 100,000 times. They know their machine. They know their route. They know their coding language. They know how to, now we're seeing it, they know how to get AI bots talking to each other. I mean, this is what they do. It's at that front line. But there are some who will really kind of thrive on figuring things out and bringing people together and catalyzing their work. And they're going to be given some opportunity to do more things. And some of them will then rise to have an opportunity to lead an organization. And that's what we call turn two. When they're responsible for the P&L, the people, now they have to lead the organization and they have to lead people. They continue to have to grow themselves and lead themselves. That doesn't go away, but it's now expanding to where it's not just about getting more expert. I actually have to be able to perceive the horizon. My perspective is changing. I'm not just looking inward. I'm looking out here and saying, well, what do we need and who can do it? And how do I bring them together? How do they get inspired? And the learning about self is how do I do that better? So I'm learning to lead the organization, lead people. If I've done that well, there's about another 10% of those leaders who will have opportunity to manage their own succession process and to think in terms of what's the future value that successors would be interested in leading. How will I hand this off well and see the business continue? That's what we would call the third turn, because at that moment, you're now moving back almost like to an entrepreneurial space, trying to figure out the future value, the reason for this to keep going, because operationally, you're managing all the current value. And you've got people who are doing that. And now you've got this luxury really to think about how do I figure out what that new product mix is, that new service mix, so keep this business going. I'd like to return to that in a second, but keep this going and then extract that new, more figured out process that helps to build the business. The reason why I point that out as the third turn is that one of the things we did in the book, because we went back from 1999 to 2024 and looked at the Fortune 25, just the top 25 largest companies. What was the list in 99 and what was the list in 2024? There are only 4 companies that are still on that list. 25 years, 21 companies are no longer there. They're gone, they're closed up, or they're much smaller in comparison. So Apple is one of the companies that's been there for 25 years. Their product mix is in 2024 is not in 25, now 26 is not what it was in 1999. Will they be able to be on that list 5 years from now? It depends, because it's not going to be from phones necessarily. It's not going to be from the personal computer necessarily. It's going to be from whatever hasn't quite emerged. So it's an open question. Someone, and will Tim Cook do it? Will his successor do it? Will have to figure out what is that, extract it and pull it through for them to continue to flourish. Or they may have to divest divisions or something else to create more space for the divisions to grow. I mean, there's 100 ways that you do this, but figuring that out is the third turn.
Well, that makes sense. And so, and it's not an opportunity, as you said, that comes to many people, because you have to have some longevity, right? To get to that point where,
Yeah.
does it, I guess
it's not a statement of their virtue, by the way, because you got people who know how to run companies. And so they grow up from 5 to 10 million or 10 to 20 million, and they step out and they go do it again and they go do it again, rinse and repeat. That's a noble work. To be that frontline worker, that's noble work. But there are a few, not because they're superior or better, but because their life experience has placed them in this spot where they have the opportunity with that longevity to create continuity experience and do a planful succession where the value can continue.
Would you say it's majority are like family owned business, or those kind of legacy businesses where they want to hand them down, or?
There are some, certainly a good number of them. And one of the things about legacy businesses, family owned or privately owned, partnerships
Yeah.
or whatever, they've done that. They're a little bit easier to pivot, to look at what's coming at them and to make the changes. It's not as volatile. It's really tough to be a CEO for a publicly traded company and be there for a long time. I think the tenure right now is less than 3 years that people are in those roles. There's just so much noise in the boardroom and other dynamics. So they typically are that. There's an awful lot of NGOs, nonprofits, socially derived businesses, founder led businesses, whatever their configuration is, that where you would find these kinds of leaders. And they're often founder led because somebody had a dream to do something and they want to see that dream continue, as opposed to, this was my job, give me my golden parachute, I'm out of here.
No, that makes sense. And I mean, another thing as well is, just in terms of like building a succession plan. So there's, I think when you're talking about the Maestro Effect, you're talking about succession plan for, the head of or the owner or someone that's pivotal as a founder, let's say. But succession planning also is across the whole company for any kind of position. There's a lot of people retiring. I know, like in manufacturing,
Yeah.
for example, that whole industry, like all the salespeople, like all the executives, they're the boomers that are aging out and retiring now. There's a lot of
Yeah.
retirement happening in many
Yeah.
industries.
And a lot of intellectual capital that goes with them if not
Yeah.
done a good job of managing the succession, as you're saying. So if we take one step back, John, you represent a discipline where you're helping companies and executives match up well.
Mhm.
There's another dimension around this, what we call continuity, which is the ability for the business with its infrastructure and equipment to continue on and this capital structure. And I find that, first of all, many businesses aren't having either continuity or succession planning conversations. They are too much in the now and not to even get their heads up and think in those terms. And they, to their own tragic end, they tend to think that of being able to do that as a perk, as opposed to a necessity. But let's say they've engaged it. The companies that engage it more often than not have the continuity kind of work taking place among the finance group of the organization, or maybe a couple of other key executives tied to the actual things that they do or bring to the world. And then the succession planning, more often than not, is being handled by HR. They're doing some kind of talent grading. They're doing some kind of, let's create the bench, let's get our pipeline right. They're handling that there. And very seldom do I run into organizations that have wedded those up, where continuity planning, the ability to be in business next year, includes talent succession, so that they're seeing how they map together. Because if we're gonna do a great big conversion to an ERP, well, that has impact on what talent you're going to be hiring and when you want to, flip the switch to get this person started when they need to onboard. And it's the interchange between the two where it really takes life and can have the value that you need to achieve. So I've become fond of saying that yes, it's needed. We should be doing it on a consistent basis, which takes a lot of the work out of it because it becomes a part of our rhythm. But we need to see the dovetailing together of continuity planning and succession planning being a part of it.
And, in terms of succession planning, I mean, what are best practices you'd say in terms of doing it well? What are some things you should be looking at for companies that are, and we're not talking about the CEO, we're talking about just, general executives or key positions, even just sales team, where you have a whole bunch of people that have built a network, they've built a book of business that they've been running for 20 years and now they're looking to retire, and all those
Yeah.
relationships, right? It's all
Yeah.
relationships. And
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I was working with a supply chain company and they're looking to bring in and start a new division. They need to bring in people that have networks, and finding people with those networks in this space is really hard because they must have worked with certain companies. So there's only a handful of people that have those kind of connections. So if those people retire, it's like you're kind of
Mhm.
holding the bag of like not only the institutional knowledge, but also the connections, the relationships, a lot of
Yeah.
the stuff that made the business be successful that are like, they're not on paper anywhere. There's no, as you said, there's no book of all of this. So
Yeah.
how do you plan for that?
Well, I think we're both pushing this button of it is an important work to do
Yeah.
and it's hard work to do, so we'd better do it in some fashion. And when we have like this proper perspective and attitude that this is good, it's actually a part of what they should be doing. There's some things that many companies are not doing that they can begin to do. So one of them is, hey, our policies are, that you travel alone or whatever. So, well, why aren't we bringing people with us who can watch and see and learn? So rarely doing things by yourself is one of the pieces. So if I'm a senior salesperson and I don't really want to be, I'm not a great trainer or whatever else, I can still bring people along, watch, learn, listen, absorb, and I can start doing that in a way where we can hand off some relationships, help people to create, get, and gain trusted relationships. And well, what if I've never done that? Well, then get started. It's better to have done 5 of them than to have done none of them. So we start saying, I can't go by myself, especially if I've got all of this knowledge and relationship equity that needs to go to other people. I'm going to need a couple of years of being able to bring people along, which means the company has to invest in that. Like if I don't have the checkbook for that, the company needs to know how important it is at the C-suite to say, you're going to do this. We want to see this built in because it's a part of the continuity and succession planning. We're not trying to, because people will sniff this out, we're not trying to have you train this person up and then your job's lost because you're a big salary to us. That's cruel. But what we can be doing is saying, we're trying to grow this business and there are some relationships we need you to manage. But if you're gone, we lose that relationship because you're the broker of that. So we've got to find ways to spread that out. And that means we're doing that planning together. It can't just be a mandate. We're figuring out how this happens. And I've also found, maybe the last thing to say for now, is that when a company gets their mind around it, they begin to understand they don't have to have a replacement for everybody. That's not succession planning. It is a roadmap for what happens if someone has a hit by the bus moment. Who will step in and cover this for now? And do they know that they will? So that they can be learning and be prepped or whatever else. They might not want the job. They might not be able to perform the job, but they're the best person at the moment to make sure that processes don't break, that details don't get dropped,
Yeah.
so that HR, whoever's leading the search to get that talent, get them up, has a little bit more room to breathe, to not compromise on what's needed, to actually do that extra work, to find the people with the networks, to use the illustration you were doing. It buys time, which is a very precious commodity when all of a sudden you're short staffed because somebody's in the hospital or just they don't want to work there anymore.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things can happen, and especially now where there's, in the executive, the tenure of people is not so long as it used to be. People
Yeah.
are moving often, so there has to be plans for like handing off certain things, transition period, onboarding, all that sort of
Hmm.
thing. I think is becoming more and more important because of the institutional knowledge that can leave your company so easily now.
Yeah.
We're seeing some executive positions less than 2-year tenure is the average. Like marketing, for
Yeah.
example, is a year,
Yeah.
1.8 years, they say. It's pretty wild when you think about that, and how much institutional knowledge you could be losing at any time because of these things. And
Yeah.
so, so who owns this then? Do you say HR owns this, or leadership needs to be mindful about it and have delegate a plan? Or
Right. At a minimum, there has to be some kind of C-suite sponsor for this, an attentive sponsor for this, not just go do this so I don't have to think about it, but we're going to be talking about it because you got to deliver on this. So whether that goes to HR, it goes to kind of a separate training entity, or whether you're working with an external vendor that's helping you do this, someone has to see it as critical enough to be paying attention to it, so that it is vital and it is now, and you are upgrading your talent even as you're upgrading talent. You have talent you're going to get, even as you're upgrading other systems. So at a minimum, it requires that. I'm finding that in an HR department where you've got a strategic HR head, a truly strategic HR head, that's a great place for this to land. because that becomes the big work. And yes, then there's all the administration stuff behind it, and you've got people with technical skills who can do that. If it's not strategic HR, it's almost laughable to say that they have to own it because they're overwhelmed with the paperwork. They're overwhelmed with compliance and then the day-to-day issues that arise with having a workforce. So there it's a bit better to put it again, maybe kick it up into the executive suite, or you start working with a fractional HR professional that does this, or you're working with a training entity that helps to dial in what you need, and then you start working it more as a project. On these days, we'll do these schedules. This is our trusted advisor, our trusted vendor for these things that we have to train. But in any of these things I've said, I'm describing something that's deliberate, that has been given enough attention and seen as important enough that we're not just throwing something at it and hoping something sticks. Like, we've got conflict in the workplace. Let's have a conflict workshop. We did one. When's the last time we did one? 10 years ago. Let's do another one. That spit in the wind stuff does not accomplish the goals that we need to accomplish.
And overall, in your experience, when you're looking at all these companies out there, like how many are actually taking it, like doing the work that needs to be done here? I mean, it seems
Oh, it's a low
I don't hear
percentage.
about succession planning too often. I mean, sometimes people mention, oh, yeah, we did some of that.
Yeah.
But it seems like an afterthought. It doesn't seem like, oh, we're zeroed in on,
Yeah. Well, I mentioned earlier, a lot of people talk about it like verbally as a perk, when we can afford it. But what they're doing is they're spending a lot of money on, like, you've got a marketing head, they're only going to be there a year and a half. Well, then you add 40% because the cost of finding the next one and getting them on board. And then we're not even talking about the opportunity loss, right?
Yeah.
It's a very expensive thing to have churn. So if we're not going to treat it as a perk, but a basic standard kind of investment that we have to embed, then the question becomes, well, what does that look like? And I have found there's a very simple way to describe it. Talk about it as a rubric. There are 3 levels to this rubric, or this infrastructure that you create, the ironworks or skunkworks of this. That first level is everybody who works at, I'll just use Ready, Set, Exec. Everybody who works with you or for you, you want frontline, top of the organization, whatever, you want them to have a certain understanding about Ready, Set, Exec. There's something that everybody needs to know to onboard well. So that's the first level. Most companies have that. It may not be robust, but you can make it more robust. You can make it more specific, and it can keep showing up. A second level is, what do people need to accomplish their jobs? So especially if you're bringing people in and you've got specific processes, maybe a certain sophistication of the technology or something, maybe you've got some patents or whatever, they didn't learn this in school, they're going to have to learn it there, or they're going to step up and take on a role. And so you need them to get some new aptitude. And so you develop a training course that's very specific to their job. I won't say a majority of companies are there, but you'll find a good number that are doing that kind of work. They've got a contractor where they create a little in-house university, they might call it, and have regular training to get that stuff done. The third level is where it's rare and where it's also very golden. And that is, let's say I'm working for you, John, and on this third level, you'd sit down with me and say, Mark, as head of sales for us or head of HR for us, you're a valuable player. We want to see you stay here, and we'd like to develop a learning path for you. We think you could fill one of these seats one day. That's no promise. You're not getting a promotion to that role now, but we really see that you could be in this kind of a role someday. And if not here, given your skills, we might lose you to someone else. We'd like that to be a happy departure rather than an angry one. So let's talk about whether you can see yourself doing this and what we'd like to invest in you to help you grow in that direction. But we also know, Mark, that you've got some things and dreams for your life. Would you feel safe enough to share what some of those are? Because we need to make both of these happen in order to keep you. And we want to make that investment. Can we do that? And at that point, you are helping to create the growth road for that person, not just something that helps them meet their compliance level, but helps to move that into build into them. You don't run into a lot of companies that do that, but there are some. And one I often point to is Kohler Corp, privately owned, but very, very large, multi-billion-dollar business. And they do this kind of work every several years where they sit down with anybody who's like a senior VP and up, and they do some growth road planning. What's the roadmap for you across these next 3 years? What experiences do you need to have? What are we going to get you there and plug you in at the right spots? And that's what this strategic HR function is to help manage that so that they've got people ready to step in as people retire, as they move on. They can start to see what are the projects that they can do. And I would say, well, yeah, they're big. There may be some luxury there, but if you've got key talent, you want to retain them. You don't want to get a surprise on Friday that they're not coming back on Monday.
Yeah. No, it's good. I mean, that also just speaks to the culture of retention and the culture of the company, right? That they want to invest in their
Hmm.
people. They want to think about that, and they don't view it as a cost. They view it more as an investment,
Yeah.
which is a big differentiator, I think, for
That's
companies.
exactly right. And I mean, I know because I've helped run executive searches, helped design some bespoke things like that. The fact that a lot of businesses don't have this kind of work done means that there's work for you to do because you're
Yeah.
helping to create those matches. But you also want to do it in a way where you got someone who will come to you in 5 years or 8 years or 10 years because the people you find they have longer tenures. They're getting satisfaction out of that. Well, that's where you need good business partners who care about and are making those investments so that you're having happy stories about plugging people into places they're going to thrive rather than, well, maybe you can fix this wrecking ball.
Yeah, I mean, retention is definitely something that's one of our key metrics that we look at besides time to
Mhm.
hire, right? And so
Sure.
we've definitely worked a lot on that. I think it's making sure there's the right cultural fit as well as the right fit for the talent and expertise of the
Yeah.
person. So, end of the day though, it comes down to the company that's hiring, like long term, they need to invest, they need to think about these things and have, I think the companies that are taking HR seriously are the ones that are also probably have the better cultures because they're investing in people. They're thinking about their people and
Right.
not, so on.
Yeah.
One of the things we had mentioned too was, in the C suite, we're seeing a growing isolation of leaders. And that could be a big risk in terms of not talking to each other, not having that communication, that peer group, the discussions that need to happen. And a lot of times people, especially like in M&As, for example, or liquidity events, succession planning events, people can be in the C level, can be isolated from one another. And this creates like blind spots for them because they don't have sort of that. And it could be maybe a lack of trust where they don't feel safe to discuss problems. Like I'll give you an example. One company I knew that if there was a problem, everybody would try to, jab a knife in someone else and say it was you or it was that, it was their responsibility and so on. I recently talked to someone at another company. They're like, oh, when there's a problem, we're so open and collaborative. We will admit there's an issue and we'll say it to the group because that way we're minimizing risk for everybody else as well. Team first mentality. But to do that, you have to feel psychologically safe that you're not going to lose your job by screwing up, right? Saying, hey, we're on product. We made a mistake. Sales, you got to be aware of this because there's an issue with the product right now in a closed sort of isolated group where you don't have a trust factor. You're not going to say that to sales because they're going to use it as ammunition to say, well, it's your fault we didn't hit our sales numbers, right? So you obviously have to have good culture, but how do you minimize sort of the isolation piece, you know, that
Well,
happens?
it's a real thing. A long time ago, when I first became much more aware of this, someone I knew that was fast rising in their company said, "Every time I get a promotion, I have fewer friends." And that was a hard thing to hear, right? And it's a sad thing to hear, and it's also a very true thing because when you are responsible for people, if you were once peers to them, they now see you. It doesn't mean they dislike you or they disrespect you, but there's this extra thing there. Like you hold
Yeah.
my job in your hands. You've been recognized over me because maybe I have wanted to get that role. And
Hmm.
so there's just some complication. And you're never quite clear when you're in that leader seat. When somebody wants to come and talk to me, they want something from me. The board member wants something from me. My, senior VP wants something from me. This frontline worker wants something from me. And tragically, maybe I start to treat my family that way. Anytime you talk to me, spouse or child, you want something from me. I'm seen as this bank kind of thing of
Hmm.
favors and money. And that just gets you in a spot where you also then maybe don't have the information you need because people aren't telling you because you've bought into this thing of I'm all that. Like I have to know, I have to be perfect, I have to present that I can't lose, I always have to look good. Well, then people aren't gonna tell you unless it's found out. And that creates low trust all throughout the system. So, one of the ways that this gets addressed is getting with peers. There are other people who are like you when you're in that role, and you need to get in the rooms with them. You need to be able to sit down, have confidential conversations. This is why I like these groups like YPO and Vistage and Convene and other mastermind kinds of things. C12 would be another one that's a faith-based one. They're really good at getting people in a thing into a room. It's protected. There's high trust, but that doesn't create a dispensation for creating trust in the organization and the safety of all people to be able to not be isolated from each other. There's been a lot of work on trust of late. Covey's work on trust has been really strong. I really like the Wild Leaders platform for trust. There's a gentleman named Corey Scheer. He's got two E's in his name, Scheer. He's written a wonderful book about trust. And what they end up looking at, particularly in this Wild Leaders Trust platform, is, do I trust my organization? Even a leader can ask, do I trust the company that I'm in? Do I trust my team? And do I trust who I work for, my boss? Find at the top of the organization, do I trust my partners? Do I trust the investors? Do I trust the board? Do I trust my family? Whatever. And it helps to identify what kind of condition that trust is, as well as some of the next steps we might take to build that trust, to build that culture of safety where people are not removed from each other, where you can be vulnerable enough to pull in, collaborate, and build, as opposed to this is a backstabbing place. That takes work. But the thing that this trust work has done is it creates a social science where you can measure, plan next steps, and build it slowly over time and see if you've made any improvement.
It makes sense, and it definitely is a problem with a lot of people, and there's various reasons too, right? It's not only them and how they may perceive themselves or feel a certain way, but I've noticed people that are in consulting. Some of my friends are, for example, and in the consulting space, it's cutthroat. Like it is showing any weakness for any reason, and your job's on the line, and that's the culture like of the whole company. That you're kind of brought into this, even if you're a good person, you're coming into this, you're like, I have to act this way because otherwise I'm next. These low trust environments create a lot of problems that maybe they're not aware of. A lot of times we hear low trust, but really on their perception, they view it as a high performing environment because we only expect the best. You ever heard that before? Where it's like,
Yeah.
we only bring in the best people. We're high performing. You got to perform at the highest level. That doesn't allow for either perceived weakness, which is like, hey, we screwed up, or there's an issue or we got to address.
Right.
And so it can become a toxic kind of workplace.
Yeah. I like the fact you brought that up. So let's pretend for a moment we're driving a car and we want to avoid the ditch on the other side. We want to be on the road. Well, the ditch on the one side is it's not my fault. It's their fault. It's their fault. It's their fault. I didn't, and you didn't give me what I needed, which is I won't accept responsibility. Right?
Yeah.
So when you say you want a high performing environment, you don't want whiners.
Yep.
Right. But if we flip it to the other ditch, we don't want people who are pretending what they're not and who are afraid. And so therefore will shine the light on other people when there's a problem and will step into the spotlight when there's a success. Because that is also inauthentic and it's also not real. It's not taking responsibility. It's trying to claim the victor's ground and stepping over people to get there. So either way, you're mistreating your team and it's going to be an isolating, non-collaborative space. You do that to me, I'm not going to trust you. I'm not going to work with you. I'm going to tell 20 people what kind of a jerk you are behind my hand, right? And now that's the group you're leading. You've just destroyed the culture as you won the battle, right? So you do your best, you bring your best, but you take responsibility when you make the mistakes. You ask the questions that show you're hungry. You do the hard work. Yeah, it's going to be intense, especially you're starting out in your career because you're learning. But you've got to get that balance right of not destroying others to get what you want, because you will never occupy that hill forever. because somebody's going to be seeking to drag you down. And what a way to live, right? Eat or be eaten. Um, you everybody dies alone in that kind of a world.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that movie before. There's a lot of movies like that.
Yeah. Yeah. They can be entertaining. We maybe live vicariously through people, but it consumes, it uses up resources. It does not build a business over time. And even if they are successful,
Hmm.
the waste that's within that is immense. The people and resources that are spent in order to get to that success. People get treated as if they're just an input, a commodity to spend.
Yeah. And would you say too, it kind of comes down to values, because if you have strong principles guiding you through your life, and a strong background, and certain beliefs and values that you have, you're less susceptible to this kind of BS, right? I mean,
I
you're
think so.
you're not going to bend to, like, you're going to set boundaries around yourself for
Mhm.
this kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I think of it as having two dimensions. You just said one of them, which is the values. Like you've got some things that you won't compromise. They're core for you. They're create a bounded set for you, provide a grounding and a foundation. The other is perspective. And so what kind of a horizon am I playing with that I bring the values to? And there is a lot of short-termism in corporations and in businesses, particularly shareholder or
Yeah.
run organizations. When did we get this month? When we get this quarter? I'm finding that like 90 days is about as far out in the future as that many of them are working, because they have to give quarterly reports. And the really quirky thing is that they're being governed by the report, not by the vision. They so that just truncates the perspective down to what will make us look good now. So we actually manipulate books and we manipulate reporting to land with what we want now, which pushes problems down the road. And we hope that we'll get it fixed by then, or that we'll have somebody to blame. It just feeds this beast of
Yeah.
meanness and deception. So we have the long term perspective wedded to near term and short term, like right now. We are making our decisions that help us navigate where we want to go, communicate what that vision is. When we are just doing the reporting as the major way of checking in, we're not talking about vision. We're not talking about values. We're not even talking about the priorities and the strategy anymore. We're just talking about, where things are. And I think a case study that I can't wait to see who writes it will be what the American car companies have done in this last couple of years, moving from, oh, we're going to be all electric to we're abandoning the
Mhm.
project. Well, why would they do that? Because the short term prospects changed, the recipe changed.
Yeah.
So long term vision, long term direction. I remember GM was saying, we're going to be about safer roads, fewer deaths on the roads because of what we do. They haven't been saying that for the last year now. And I'm not trying to cast blame. They just made a great big pivot from everything electric by 2035 to
Yeah.
maybe. And that's because the right now and being able to feel like you're still in control of the business is what is more paramount than the perspective or the values.
Well, that's where there's the competing, two fronts, right? There's the short-term thinking, the 90-day cycle, the shareholder
Hmm.
fiduciary responsibility that the executive has. On the other
Yep.
side, you have long-term business growth vision. You have long-term vision for yourself as well, and where you'd like to take the company. And a lot of times they're competing. I hear this from middle managers all the time, right? They're like,
Hmm.
I don't know why they're letting all these people go. They're hamstringing us just to hit the quarterly shareholder price.
Right.
And they're losing all these, as these institutional value, people like knowledge
Yeah.
and so on.
Yep.
And I've seen it a lot in corporate America, but that's kind of the thing where we always say, oh, they had to cut 10,000 jobs to hit their share price, and
Right.
look at the value go up. The stock price rewards that behavior, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's short termism, run amok. And one of the interesting things is ownership, especially if these are privately held businesses and they've had to hire a CEO to run things or whatever, they're also taking a hit. So we talk about, the 1% growing and all of that. They tend to be people who own funds and they're spread across all kinds of vehicles. And then they are the C-suite that are hired and have great big comp packages because of what they've been able to deliver in other places. But the privately held owner, who's almost like, 70% of their estate's in this business, they are taking less of a draw in order for the executive salaries. So you're getting pinched between owner and worker in order to accommodate the bloat inside the C-suite. Now, it might sound extreme, but if you track the numbers over time, well, like what percentage are the monetary flows toward labor, toward ownership shares, and toward executive salaries, that is burgeoning right there in the middle. And it's typically people who have trained their mother's milk is the 90-day cycle. And how do we make this work right? How do we get people to their bonuses and get through it, and then rinse and repeat into the next year? And once they hit 3, 4, 5 years and it didn't work, then they're out for 6 or 9 months while they're searching for their next gig. And I don't think I'm exaggerating. I'm just describing a dynamic that's out there. And in order to be different than that, we have to bring the long term in with the short term, marry them up, make sure there's a line of sight, and make our decisions with that in mind so that we're plotting what does churn cost us across 10 years instead of what does just this one cycle of right sizing the business to make our 90-day cycle, what does that cost us?
That also comes down to like incentive structures, though. I mean, if you have
Yeah,
long-term incentive plans
absolutely.
for stock and everything else, that to them is like people respond to incentives. They're gonna, as we used to say in sales, work the plan. You're gonna work the plan to what's gonna pay you the most. That's just the way you're gonna
Yeah.
operate, right? So
Yep.
if the incentives are there, and I guess that just a segue to our next topic, that goes to boards, making sure the board is adding value to the company and making decisions that are going to add value. And sometimes they don't. So I know you work with a lot of boards. What can you tell us about some of the things you've seen?
Well, I'll talk about it in terms of the people on the board and then what the board does. So to be a board member is to be something different than being the CEO of the company.
Yep.
If I ask a board member of a company what the job is, most times they can't answer the question. And if they start to form an answer, they start to describe like, well, to be a partner to the CEO. So their whole thinking is to supervise the work in some way of the chief executive officer. And this is assuming that the board itself, they hired the CEO as opposed to the CEO appoints the board. That's where you start to get what's the structure. But the point is there's a board role is one of governing, of thinking about the company and its future, about not convoluting and complicating that. So you end up talking about things like duty of loyalty, duty of care, duty of obedience. Like we're going to obey the law. Are we obeying the law? We better obey the law. Are we just trying to stretch it to it till when it breaks and then have plausible deniability, right? That we are here to help it honor what the law requires of us, to have high standards. We are here to think in terms of how this mission will get extended. That's the work. And are we in compliance with that? You also kind of face the federal government and state government showing that there is supervision, that there is a governance that's taking place. So to know that my job as a board member is to make sure those things are happening far more than what did the finishing department do last Wednesday and how do we fix that? That's a pretty significant difference. And I've spent some time with a lot of board members helping them understand that we don't need two CEOs. We need a governance structure. You're a part of that gives great advice and perspective, but not duplicative things. We already have the senior team meet to plan things. Why are we doing that? Because now we've got two senior teams. That's a waste of time and money. And that's overstepping. So that's one thing, helping people understand that role. Then when you talk about the structure, there's a couple of simple questions to ask. Is this an advisory board or is this a fiduciary board? Let's be really clear about that. Advisory board, we're not here to run things. We're here to give our best perspectives. We're really not the board of the organization. We are an assembled panel of people with different expertise. They're going to bring us in confidential conversation the hardest things to think through. And so we're here to advise that. And if we're voting, we're just kind of voting to say, well, collectively, we think this is the best advice, but we're not, we're not able to hold people accountable. If I don't think that I'm being listened to, I can always resign from that kind of a board. If we were at a fiduciary board, now we are responsible for the condition of that organization, the compliance of that chief executive officer with the strategy, making sure they have a strategy. We're holding them accountable to acting on the strategy rather than their day-to-day tasks or who they hire, what the teams are. That's what they're there to do. And again, if we start stepping down into that, it's because they haven't performed their job. And the question is, why are they in that role? As opposed to us stepping in and doing that job. So just that real clear boundedness to the work so that everybody can do their work is the thing that we really want to pay attention to. Last thing to say is then that means you have to have a really strong chair that understands that. If I am running the business and also chairing the board, I better be clear what hat I'm wearing in what conversation. And it's very good to have an outside facilitator in that case so that I can speak as the executive or I can speak as the chair without also having to play traffic cop for the conversation. That just means people don't know what hat I'm wearing when I'm saying how I want things. And it may be that I don't know what hat I'm wearing, which means I'm the source of confusion for people. So we just want to kind of draw those threads apart, be clear, advisory or fiduciary, right? What's the hat that the chair is wearing? And are we governing or are we actually operating? If we're operating, then we're duplicating the senior team.
Yeah, it's a clear distinction there because, I mean, you hear about board dysfunction quite a lot, and is it that these people are just not experienced or not knowing their role, or is it that they're overstepping? I mean, what do you think is the
They often overstep because they don't know the role. And that's where I go to my first comment. I've accomplished something in business. You're now asking me to step on the board. So what advice do I bring? I bring advice as if I'm the CEO of the company. Or I tell you, when I was CEO of my company, here's this thing I was doing over here. So this is what I think you should do. And I'm only speaking from that perspective. And I'm not gaining, what does it mean to have a board member's perspective? What is that? What's that level of the atmosphere is that? How do I know where it begins and ends?
Yeah.
Very few boards resource themselves as board members, require their education, actually have an onboarding process for someone to become a board member. And it's also important as a board, if anything that you do once it leaves the boardroom, that you're speaking with one voice. If there is cantankerousness and division inside the boardroom that's not been resolved or managed in some way and that spills out, now you set up all kinds of factions within the shareholder community, within the employees, and we are then a source of the problem that no CEO can overcome.
No, that's definitely some good advice for boards out there. And you're right, the onboarding piece is not something we often hear about. So
Mm-hmm.
probably something to consider, right? I think that's some pretty good things to take away for today. And I really appreciate you coming on to share with us. I look forward to checking out your book.
Well, thank you, John. It was a delight. I think you do good work. I spent a little bit of time on your site to see, okay, so why would you start your business? Why would you do what you do? And to learn about it and just even to hear you put these kinds of questions together, I just have this imagination that you've got clients that are very happy you're there.
Well, they'd also say I'm a pain in their ass sometimes because I tell them what they
Yeah,
need to hear, not what they want to hear. And
right.
it's
But
a
if they're
skill.
taking that medicine, then
It's
good.
taken a long time to get there. It
Yeah.
also comes from experience building the confidence to be able to talk to people in the
Mm-hmm.
senior leadership level of companies. And I think that
Yeah.
has taken me, 20 years to build that.
Well, more power to you as you keep doing this good work.
Well, I appreciate that. And it was great having you on. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.